In a world of constant motion and ceaseless distractions, finding a moment of peace can feel like an elusive luxury. The allure of technology, the demands of everyday life, and the perpetual rush often pull us into a whirlwind of chaos, leaving little room for quiet reflection. Where success is often equated with hustle and grind, there exists a longing for something more. Could there be another way? Well, in 1967, the famous author Napoleon Hill answered this very question. He published his final book, Grow Rich with Peace of Mind. He discovered that true success isn't just about accumulation. It's about finding harmony within oneself and with the world around us. One that honors both ambition and inner peace. Rediscover Napoleon Hill's timeless wisdom. Think and Grow Rich with Peace of Mind, an online event that dares to challenge the frenetic rhythm of our modern world. Something is coming.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Something is coming. We have an amazing guest. My name is Karen Zaff-Rivera. I am one of the master coaches here at the Napoleon Hill Institute. And today I have the privilege to introduce our guest speaker. Another bonus call here for all of you. I hope that you're ready, that you are sitting, listening, and full attention to all the information we're about to receive. Professor Bond, it is my pleasure to introduce you. He is an engineer and a technology consultant specializing in solving problems. And his engineer work span multiple domains, from Olympic sport tech to sonar and aerospace. He was also one of the advisors for the Prime Minister in the UK. He was in the Council. And it is my great pleasure to have you here, Professor Bond. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's really great to be here, to be able to talk to people about trying to be successful in life. And it's growing rich, perhaps, and in all the senses, not just money, and doing it with peace of mind. So it's a great subject. So thank you for that. And I'm going to be talking about healthy ego today.
Exactly. And we can all absolutely better ourselves. So thank you for that.
Much pleasure. So let me just kick off. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to talk to you. And what I'm going to be talking about today is in chapter 7 of the book. So if you've got it or you got the PDF, that's what we've been looking at. And I'm going to give you some thoughts on it from my own personal perspective. So I do two main things in life. One of them is I solve problems for groups, Olympic sports being one of them, Formula One being another, as examples. And my other main thing in life is to work as a success coach. So I help people to be successful, and that involves obviously doing things that they really want to achieve, but also learning to do it in a way that makes them happy and fulfilled. I think that's absolutely essential to everything that I teach and essential to how one wants to live. So we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to start, before we address anything that Napoleon Hill discussed, I want to give you a couple of different ways to think about the subject matter, because he's talking about ego. And I want to talk about that word first, because everyone has heard of the word ego, and it's a single word that is used in many different contexts. It's very heavily laden by people and not in very helpful ways necessarily. So I'm going to start by just discussing that a little bit, and then we'll walk through some of what he says in chapter 7 and see how we can apply some of the thinking to what he's saying. And some of it you'll discover I'll probably reinterpret a little bit differently. So the very first thing really is that in the modern world, the term ego came really from Freud, who described the ego along with two other components of the mind, the superego and the id. And these were his terms for the ego being, if you like, the sense that you have of self, and the superego being a part of you that develops to try and control the ego, and the id being what we now call your subconscious mind most of the time. And it's important really to understand, I think, where these things come from. Now, no one will ever be able to tell you how humans or human psychology truly developed, but a reasonable way of thinking about it, at least, if you just like a metaphor for thinking about it, is this, that a lot, not all, but a lot of the way in which we've developed is in many ways acts towards survival. And so we as humans have many, many mechanisms for surviving. We've evolved successfully as a species by surviving. So one of the things we've evolved is the ego, and the ego, I think at some level, in some way, exists in the majority of animals. And in the following sense, it is the individual animal's sense of doing the things that it needs to do to survive. Now, if you have a group of animals, none of which have any sense of self-preservation, they probably won't do very well. So most animals have a developed sense of self-preservation. I think that's where our ego comes from. But humans are also social animals, and fundamentally we do much, much better as a species in groups working with others. In fact, it's extraordinarily difficult to even survive the barest minimum life on your own. We are utterly interdependent as a species, and therefore our survival also develops so that we take other people into account. And a lot of the issues that people discuss around ego are related to the issue that there are times that our strong instinct to do that which is best for our survival can be in conflict with things that are actually better for the group. And I'm going to talk a little bit about ways to square the circle. A lot of the things that we do, a lot of the laws we pass, a lot of the regulations that we have, a lot of the things that we consider ethical and moral actually arise from the need of society to balance out in various ways the individual's need to do things and the group's need for things. And in summary, so this will make a lot more sense in a minute, but in summary, if you want to live successfully and you want to do it with peace of mind, it's much, much easier if you figure out a way of having congruence between these things. And the easiest way of getting congruence is simply to decide that you're going to live a life figuring out what you want and what you need and making sure that you get it, because you have deficiency needs. In other words, if you don't meet these needs, you won't feel really good. But doing it in such a way that everyone else benefits from it. And if you live your life like that way, you have a tremendous internal congruence, and that makes it much, much easier to live. A bad way to try living is to decide that you'll get the things you want by taking advantage in an unreasonable way of anyone else. That usually just doesn't work well. So, and if you read widely what Napoleon Hill says, I'll start with this. What Napoleon Hill said and what Carnegie taught him was this: if you want to live well, embed in your thinking, how do I create value for others all the time? Because by doing that, you can do well yourself, but equally everyone else benefits. And that was, I'd say, central to the philosophy that Carnegie was talking about and taught to Napoleon Hill. So we have really these two parts, and Freud's interest was that the superego can and often does get very aggressive and attack the ego. So let me explain a little bit what that's about, because I find this talking to people quite often, and you want to deal with it if you want peace of mind. So the superego essentially is a part of you that develops in order to make sure that you don't really annoy everyone else in a tribe, because if you really annoy everyone else in a tribe, they'll throw you out of the tribe. And if you're on your own, in the way in which we've evolved over many millennia, if you're on your own, thrown out of a tribe, it's pretty much a death sentence. So one of the things you have to do to survive is get along with the tribe. Tick. But the other thing you have to do, but many people are driven to do because it's a successful thing in a tribe, is create massive value and therefore be literally outstanding, be seen to be creating huge value for everyone around you. And if you do that, you get social status. So we have an instinct which is related to our ego, which is to get social status, to get it by creating value, and to receive the respect of our peers by doing it. And quite often that can involve competition. And on the other hand, we need some feedback mechanism to make sure that that doesn't go out of hand. And that we get as an inherent sort of a construct called the superego, which according to Freud is modeled on our parents, mainly the father. So what we end up with is an internal moral regulator that says, don't step too far out. The reason I'm mentioning this is that a lot of people in the modern world, not all, but a lot of people are very self-critical, and they beat themselves up. They are very hard on themselves. And the reason that they're very hard on themselves is that superego has become rather powerful and starts to attack the ego, because it thinks one way you can, with Freud phrased the superego is to say it's an ego ideal. So you're given an ideal of the person you should be that you don't meet. And if you don't meet it, or you don't believe you're meeting it, then the superego starts to attack the ego and saying, well, you're useless. Why don't you do this? And this is quite common. And you just don't want to live that way. It's a very bad feedback mechanism. It doesn't teach people much usually, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So rule number one, really, of living successfully, peacefully, is be kind to yourself and be kind to those around you, sure, but be kind to yourself. Start by being very kind to yourself. A rampant superego is rarely helpful. And the way in which you can have a superego that's well behaved and live with peace is very simple. Have clarity about your values and then live according to your values. Don't break your values. It's really difficult to break your values. If you break your values, you will feel guilt, either subconsciously or consciously. And if you feel guilt and you've been taught, as we are as kids, usually, that guilt should be punished, people end up with self-punishment, and they can do it for decades. It's very bad. So we don't want to do that. So the first thing is just decide to be kind to yourself, establish what you think are reasonable values in your life, and then decide that that's how you're going to live and function. You live according to your values, and you are kind to yourself and those around you. You'll find it much, much easier to live a really healthy, peaceful life. Absolutely. Clarity about your values it's absolutely essential to everything you do. And then just decide that you're going to live according to your values and you want good values. So that's a little bit of a background, I'd say, from a Freudian perspective, but there's a very interesting perspective that comes from economics as well. And I want to touch on it because it also, there is a conflict, and you see it all the time, and you can see it in political debate and social debate, that there are conflicts at one level, in your personal level. There are conflicts about your ego, that which you are doing for yourself to become outstanding, and other people around you. Are you doing it in a way that benefits them or not? And the same is true elsewhere. So what happens in economics is that if you create a system of exchange, so an economic system of exchange, then it's possible to do pretty well, even if everybody is acting in their own self-interest. And this was first noted by Adam Smith, who called it the invisible hand. He said, well, the butcher and the baker and the blacksmith and so on will be doing their jobs in order to make money for themselves and do as well as they can. Yet remarkably, by the feedback process of supply and demand matching, everyone creates more value for everyone else. So it is possible to have a part of society that functions pretty well, providing everyone's creating value in a way that other people can access through fair exchange. But another thing humans have to do, so it's a form of cooperation. A market exists so we can cooperate and yet mainly be focused on our own benefit. A lot of other things we have to do in life don't work that way. And what we have to do as a species, as a group, even if you work in a firm, do this all the time, you have to agree to cooperate with other people. And anyone who's worked in any firm knows that if cooperation, or any team, any sports team, if cooperation breaks down, it's usually very problematic. So here is the thing, and this is a piece of economic theory that John Nash, the great mathematical genius John Nash, got the Nobel Prize in economics for. And he said the following. He said, if you have a system where people cooperate, or they want to cooperate, they decide they should cooperate, and there are some payoffs to it, then it's only stable if it's not optimal for any single individual to then behave differently. So, for example, if when you're at university, you're maybe living with some other students, and everyone agrees, wouldn't it be good if all the dishes are cleaned? If you've ever been to university, you might have experienced this one. Everyone says, yeah, it'd be really good. Let's clean the dishes. And then, of course, everyone figures that, well, how about I don't do it because that would be in my benefit, and let the others do it. Of course, everyone makes that decision independently, and the dishes are never cleaned. So this sort of thing happens, and it's called a breakdown of Nash equilibrium. So why does it matter? Well, it's putting in stark contrast the benefit of the group, which would be if everyone cooperates, against the independent optima of each individual. And very often it turns out that equilibria are not, these equilibria are not stable. And so what you try and do in society is you try and stabilize them by changing the payoffs. So you say, if you cooperate, you get all kinds of good stuff. And if you don't, you get some bad stuff. And if you want a very stark example of this, criminality is punished by people going to jail, for example, because that's a large negative payoff for behavior that doesn't benefit the group, but does benefit the individual. Right? There's one example. So why am I mentioning this? Well, very simply because one of the challenges we all face in life, and you face it all the time, is, are you able to get into a cooperative equilibrium? How do you make it stick? And one of the things, if you want to be successful and you want peace of mind, is you have to be good at working with other people. That means you want to cooperate, because the cooperative payout's usually really good, but it's usually highly unstable, as Nash pointed out. So figuring out a way to be really good at stabilizing those equilibria, that's me sounding terribly economic about it, but in practical terms, getting cooperation in whatever your team at work, your family, with your friends, in your company, anything in your life that matters is absolutely profoundly fundamental. And of course, you'll have come across the mastermind group concept. And the key thing that Carnegie mentions in the mastermind group, he uses the word harmony. And what he means by harmony is that everyone is there to cooperate. And he proposes that anyone who doesn't cooperate is simply removed from the group. That's his way of preserving it. So again, if you want to succeed and do it with peace of mind, you want to sit down and be thoughtful about everything you do and how you get to create a system where people are really comfortable working together. Now, the good news is that people, generally speaking, because we're a social species, are actually really well programmed to work with other people. People naturally tend to form teams and naturally tend to enjoy working in teams. But there is a tension between that and wanting to be outstanding, i.e. get more social status than others, which is the ego trying to make you survive better by having higher social status, because high social status historically was a thing that led to you tending to survive better, or your progeny surviving better. It's not always true, of course, but that was probably what the mechanism of the ego is. So all of these things lead to tensions, and you need to be aware of them and understand what they are. Because if you don't understand where some of these tensions come in and where you sit with them, it can be very, very difficult in life to figure out how to live comfortably. A lot of people find it very difficult if someone is uncooperative and they don't know why or how you deal with it. And so you want to be thoughtful about this. And so in a certain sense, for us, what does self-survival mean? What does it mean, the survival of us versus the group? And I would say that Maslow more or less answered this. So Maslow was a psychologist who was interested in not in how people don't function well, but in how they do function well. And he came up with this famous pyramid. And he put it really into two pieces. So the bottom of the pyramid, right at the bottom, says, do you have food, water, clothing, the basics? And interestingly, in chapter 7, Hill, who was earlier in the book, he says that at one point he was eating bark because he was so impoverished as a young man. He says, ask yourself, have you ever suffered from these things? And a lot of people in the West don't suffer from it's called level 1 of Maslow. They don't suffer stress at that level, but many people do, and that is the first level of survival. And the second is, are you secure? That's level 2 of Maslow. Do you feel secure? My observation of the modern world is a lot of people do not feel secure in this world for all kinds of reasons. They're not secure. And if you're not feeling secure, then it's quite hard to have peace of mind, or very hard to have peace of mind. Level 3 is the focus on belonging. Do you have belonging? Do you have friends? Do you have people that care about you, that you care about? Do you have, if you like, a little team? And do you have comfort? Have you gone above the bare minimum? And level 4 is, do you have maybe more comfort, and do you have the respect of your peers? Are you respected? Do you have social status? Now, just observing people, you'll see that we operate at these levels throughout our life. All of them matter. Little children need food, shelter, security. They also need unconditional love, like roses need rain, and they need friends. They want friends, and they need nice friends who are kind to them. And children are absolutely sensitive to social status. And as adults, we move in some sense along a curve where as we fill in each level of Maslow's pyramid, we start to focus on levels above. And Maslow's point, which is a really good point, is if you get challenged at any of the lower levels, your energy is likely to go there. To make a very obvious point, if suddenly you didn't have food and water, after a day or two, that would almost certainly be your 100% focus would be getting food and water, because you wouldn't survive without it. You wouldn't be sitting writing a novel or painting a picture. You would drop every heart activity and focus on your needs. So here's rule number 1 of living really well is, I do this once a month. I tell all my clients, do this once a month. Just sit down, draw a pyramid, and fill in how you're feeling about these different levels. Where do you think you are on them? And also be analytical. Just say, do I have enough? Do I have enoughness here? And for each of these levels, you want to know, certainly level 3 and level 4, social status and comfort and so on. It's possible because these are deficiency needs. That means if you are deficient in them, you notice it and are uncomfortable. And if you're deficient in the lower levels, you'll get drawn to them. And as long as you're deficient, you will not have peace of mind. You will be stressed and uncomfortable. And if you go from a higher level to a lower level, it's very stressful and very uncomfortable. So one of your first jobs in life is to sit and say, you have 3 levels of each of these things. You want to say, well, what is enough for a house? What's an adequate size of house I'd be okay with? What's a house be great? What's the biggest house I'd ever want? And an infinitely big house is probably not the good answer. If there are some people for whom they cannot fill a deficiency need. So no house is too big, no amount of money is enough, and no amount of social status satisfies them. The problem with that psychology is that if you're never satisfied, then you don't really have peace of mind. So one of the things you want in peace of mind is just take a realistic look and say, well, I'd be okay with X. If I had a certain size house or this number of cars or whatever, and I'd be okay with that. And I don't really want more than that. And if you want more, fine, it's fine. We're all different. But an awareness of what your needs are and your wants are around your deficiency needs is essential. And here is why. As far as your ego is concerned, these are survival. To the ego, there's not much difference between someone a group that you value, like your peers, withdrawing social status. In other words, being cancelled. There's not much difference between that to your instincts and someone pulling a knife on you, because either will kill you if you are in the million years or so Homo sapiens have evolved. you would die by being thrown out of a tribe, i.e. having social disapproval or lack of social status or social status removed. And that's why people react so very vehemently to criticism, by the way. We're very sensitive to criticism because as far as our ego is concerned, it is a serious threat if someone is criticizing us, and so on. So all of these things to say, you need to sit down and have an awareness and make sure that those levels are good and have a plan, if they're not, to fix them. Even if they're not good, if you have a plan and you are working to fix them, you will be vastly more secure than someone who is simply ignoring them. And then finally, Maslow says, well, where you really want to put your energy is the upper level, which is the level of real abundance. It is in two parts. The first part is developing yourself, your talents, do the things you love to do, find your joy in life, develop and grow as a person. And the second level of that is sit and ask yourself, how can I create massive value for the world, for the people around me? How can I bring abundance to those around me? So the first level is really saying, how do I grow? So it's still self-focused. And the second level is eccentric in the sense of outside yourself. It is saying, how do I make the world a better place? And you want to spend as much of your energy as you possibly can, and much as your time in this self-actualization phase of life. But here's Maslow's point, really difficult to do if the lower part of the pyramid falls apart or isn't good. So it's your job to do both and have a lot of awareness. So all of that said, finally, I'm going to talk about frames quickly, and then we'll go through Napoleon Hill's chapter, and you'll see how these ideas hang together. So the final thing I want to talk about very quickly is a thing called a frame. There's a lot one can say about frames, and I'm going to say it very quickly, but think of this. If your frame at any given moment in your life is your intent, the intent you hold. It is the perspective that you have in your mind about things, and the emotional coloring, or if you like, emotional strength, or the emotion that you have in your mind. And one of the ways in which you can look at a lot of what Napoleon Hill is talking about is in this notion of frames. So having said all of that, I'm now going to quickly run through some of the remarks about Napoleon Hill's chapter. So this is chapter 7, how to develop your own healthy ego. And the first thing he talks about is a story. So he defines quickly what the ego is. And then he talks about a story, which is when Edwin Barnes, who had really virtually no money, went off to go and become a partner. His goal was to become a partner with Edison, and of course there's more related in other books by Napoleon Hill about how all that worked, including Think and Grow Rich. And Barnes famously succeeded enormously and made a lot of money. So what in this book Hill says is that Barnes had 31 beautiful suits, one for every day, and he related that when he went to see Edison, people in the office were laughing at him and sniggering behind his back. And he went to see Edison, and he spoke, and Edison just kindly said to him, what have you come to see me about? And he says, well, it's to Mr. Edison's credit that he didn't judge me by my appearance. That's it. Now, I think what Napoleon Hill is trying to say here is that Barnes wore beautiful clothes for the rest of his life because he didn't want to feel ever humiliation, or that there was anyone, literally he says this, never want to be in a room where I'm not the best dressed man. And that's fine. But from my perspective, I have to tell you that is by no means the most interesting part of this story. Not at all. What it says, if you want it translated into everything we've just said, is Edwin Barnes had developed, the fact that people were laughing at him meant that he had, and he was poorly dressed and didn't have money, meant that his social status within the group was essentially zero. Not nice to be laughed at. It's a form of social rejection. Then Edison gave him his chance, and after that, Barnes decided that he didn't want to feel that social rejection again. He wanted to be much more solid on level 4 of his Maslow pyramid, which is fine. But the interesting thing here is actually Edison. Here is this extraordinary genius, most successful inventor ever. And what about his ego? Well, he completely pocketed it. And if there's one thing, some people, when I talk, people say, "What is there? One takeaway? Is there one big thing?" Well, I think there's more than one thing I'm going to say that different people will find useful and helpful. But here is one really key thing: learning to pocket your ego, and by this I mean not flex your ego, your sense of wishing to be outstanding in order to gain social status in a group. That part of your ego. Pocketing your ego because you feel secure. Pocketing your ego because you feel secure. And how can you feel secure? Because you don't need to be always in an endless ego flexing battle with everyone around you trying to get social status. There's another way of having social status. And it's interesting, it's very simple. You create social status by handing it out to others. And so there are people whose model of getting social status is this. They say it's a zero-sum game. I will get it by pushing other people down or trying to get ahead. And you don't actually have to do that. Even though it looks like social status is a zero-sum game, you certainly don't have to get it that way. One of the ways of having social status is by developing yourself, working cooperatively with others, and letting them have social status. Absolutely. And that's what clearly, in this instance, Barnes was treated very kindly by Edison. And so for me, the real standout thing isn't gee, if you an ego booster is get 31 suits. It's this: if you are, whatever your level, whether you're fabulous or not fabulous, really good at something or not yet, then whatever your level, just treat other people really well, and you don't have to be egotistical about them. And you can get a fabulous result, which is what Edison did. So that's my first remark about this chapter. For me, the standout part is really that Edison here just appears to be a fabulous guy. Who wouldn't want to work with Edison if that's how he treats you? So the second part of the chapter, he says, reflect on your childhood. And if you go through the list of things he says to reflect on, he says, well, we don't want to spend our time looking at the past, but you might understand some of the things that are driving you. And I think this is absolutely good advice. It's not enough to know what you want. You have to know why you want them. And a lot of what we want come from our deficiency needs. And that's fine. You have to fill in your deficiency needs. So you have to fill in the needs in your Maslow pyramid, the things that you want. That's good. But you probably don't want to spend your entire lifetime focused there. You want to spend your energy when you can, self-actualizing, becoming at both levels. And that means trying to grow as a person yourself and trying to help everyone around you to live abundantly. That's really a summary of what you want to be trying to do, I believe. Yeah, so absolutely. So someone's just written, treat others really well. Absolutely. That's super important. And people who misinterpret what ego means think that the way they stand out is to push others down, to say that others aren't good enough. Sadly, there's maybe not an adult around who hasn't been on the receiving end of someone else, so we call it the ego flex, someone else putting him down and saying, you're not good enough, and here's 10 reasons why. Putting people down is damaging to them at many, many levels, and it's completely unnecessary, absolutely unnecessary. So what we want to do if we want to live with peace of mind and abundance is we don't want to flip that on its head and do the opposite. You want to go through life trying to grow and be as good as you can and finding every reason to find how wonderful other people are. Simple. And I have a very simple rule, by the way, which I'm happy to share with you. It is this: if I find that someone is tremendous at something, I love telling them. And my golden rule is just never flatter. I never say a compliment or something nice that isn't completely sincere and true. And the reason for that is that people are so unused to someone sincerely complimenting them, which is not great, but it's true that so many people are so unused to it that they will test you. They'll very often think that you might not be sincere. So do it with total sincerity always, and just go through the world, just trying to find reasons to say how wonderful people are. And the remarkable thing you discover very quickly is that so many people are utterly wonderful in so many ways, and it's great. If you can live life meeting people and seeing how wonderful they are, and make them feel a bit better about themselves because you notice it and you say so sincerely, how wonderful. Much easier to live with peace of mind and think, grow rich with peace of mind if that's the approach that you take. So what about people who really have lack? If they have lack, it means they typically have fear. And if you have fear, it can happen that you have a sort of insatiable desire to fill in the hole for a very long time and overcompensate. Overcompensation is clearly what Napoleon Hill did when he got it's in the book, big estate, and anything less than 2 Rolls Royces wasn't good enough. That's a classic case of an overcompensation. And he says, well, later on when I'd achieved, and he wanted fame, he said, I want to be famous. That is telling me that he had a profound desire for massive social status, which he clearly felt he lacked. So when he'd finally achieved fame and had massive success in life, reflecting as an older man, which is what this book's about, he said, gee, I didn't need all that actually. And of course, that's part of growing. We're not fixed. Our egos aren't fixed. And it's very, very common that when we're younger and we have these deficiency needs for social status, that we're a little bit loud and shouty. It happens. And then when we grow a bit and we've done a bit more and moved on in life, we don't feel the need anymore. And that's a good sign of a healthy ego, I would say, in people, that they are settled in understanding where they are, that they're good at some things and people are great at other things, and that's all good. So that's my remark there. I think there's an interesting remark in the third thing he talks about. He gives a story, and I'm assuming people have read the book here, but if you haven't flipped through, it'll make more sense if you read chapter 7. But chapter 7, he talks about a salesman who started thinking that he was getting old, and this master salesman suddenly started failing to get sales. So Hill comes up with what I think is a really clever idea, a very creative idea. He gives him an ear trumpet and says, well, since you think you're old, use an ear trumpet. The guy says, why? My hearing's fine. He says, yeah, but now you can pretend that if somebody says no, you just pretend you haven't heard them and carry on. And then Hill says, listen, you'll agree with me that no one who is going to buy insurance unless they really need it and it's valuable to them. And the guy says, yes. So no harm done if you try this. This is probably the most important part of the chapter, in my opinion. And again, it's not what Napoleon Hill is emphasizing. But why does he put it in there, and why does it matter? Because Napoleon Hill understood that you need congruence to sell. Congruence means alignment. Your subconscious and your consciousness need to align, and in this case, your values. So what he's saying to the guy is just remember your values, because if he just said to the guy, go out and hard sell, and the man didn't have that as an alignment to his values, he would not do it. He would self-sabotage. So Hill checked carefully that the man agreed that going out and trying to persuade people to buy insurance wasn't immoral, because he knew the guy was moral. That's actually the most important part of the chapter. It's repeated elsewhere in the book, by the way. Hill just says, don't try selling things that to people that don't need them. Only create real value. Don't create fake value. Don't be that kind of salesperson. If you have to sell a thing, go out and create value for people, and because people that you sell to don't need a thing. It's just bad. So he's very clear on his moral values. And here is a simple rule of life. It is way easier to sell a thing if you're really sure, deeply sure, that you're selling a thing that is absolutely in line with your highest moral values. And if you're a highly moral person, you will have great trouble and massive, massive internal blocks if you try selling things you do not believe in to people that don't really want them. So again, if you want to have peace of mind when you're making a better life for yourself and making money and so on. Align to your values. But the other interesting thing about this chapter is, so again, Napoleon Hill here says, well, you can have an ego booster. But the really interesting thing here is that what the salesman had done was an example, a wonderful example actually, of negative autosuggestion. So Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich was a massive advocate of using autosuggestion to alter your beliefs. And he talks about positive autosuggestion, repetition, preferably with feeling, in order to create a belief in yourself. Well, negative autosuggestions are what people receive from others and from themselves often. And if you accept a negative autosuggestion, in this case, the salesman accepted a negative autosuggestion that he created himself, and it was this. He said to himself, I am too old to do this and therefore cannot succeed. That changed his belief. And that changed his self-image, and he followed his belief in self-image. And therefore, he stopped selling. But interesting question. How would he stop selling? He was doing the same thing. Napoleon Hill said very clearly, he's doing the same thing, just stop selling. And here's why. When you are communicating, almost all your communication comes from your body language, the rest from the tone of voice. A small amount is what is the intellectual content that you're talking about. So what happened very simply is this. When he changed using negative autosuggestion, his internal belief that he couldn't sell anymore, he just projected it massively with his body language. So what Napoleon Hill did really was a clever trick to reverse that negative suggestion. But I think the really valuable thing in his story is the following. Be aware yourself of all the negative auto-suggestions that you can have. There are many of them, and we don't have time to go into the extremely interesting literature on thinking about aging, but to summarize it, if you merely think about being old and you're a Westerner, we have been conditioned to believe that you get less good as you get older. And it's known that people living in other countries believe that as you get older, you get wiser, smarter, more experienced, better at everything. And so they don't age the same way. Very interesting literature on that, where psychologists have checked these effects of our beliefs about aging. But you can have lots of other beliefs, all kinds of beliefs that can pop into your head and can act as blockers. And some of these are what Napoleon Hill is relating to. So the story of the salesman with the diamond ring. Without his diamond ring, he couldn't sell. Well, of course he could sell. Nothing about him had changed. So what was the effect of his 8-carat diamond ring that he'd sent in for a repair or something? Well, very simply, without it, when he was looking, it affected his belief and his confidence. His confidence changed. Change that, you change your body language, you change your performance. As simple as that. So when Hill says, well, gee, Hill himself says, yeah, I wouldn't feel great with a mountain of rock, like that on my finger, and find your own thing. He's really just saying that he's saying at some level the following thing. There are things that different people can do that enable them to feel good and to feel comfortable. It could be the diamond ring. It could be Barnes' set of clothes. One of the useful things you can learn is to anchor. And anchoring means you don't need any of the above. You simply visualize success. And just for example, simple anchor is just put your fingers, like finger and thumb together like that every time you see success. And then whenever you do it by association, eventually, whenever you put your fingers like that, you will project yourself into that successful state. It doesn't matter, therefore, what you're wearing. You don't need an external trigger or trick to have this kind of confidence. You can internally trigger it. So that's anchoring, and I'm sure that many of you have heard of it. So he then talks about ego and opulence, and Ray Cunliffe, who I think the story here, so Ray Cunliffe was very successful, decided I would say he'd absolutely covered the bases in his Maslow 1 through 4. He had a big house, a car, a chauffeur, maids, clearly living well, highly respected by people, I'm sure, in his community and so on. But interestingly enough, so he decided to do what's reasonable. He said, well, gee, how about I start to take it easy now? Well, that's fair enough. But mistake number one was he hadn't sat down and looked at his Maslow's pyramid, as far as I can see, at all. And so the first thing he did, he appears not to have worked out his cash flow. He ran quickly out of money. So there doesn't seem to have been a plan behind it. And this might be a very obvious point, but he was obviously a very successful businessman, smart guy, selling Cadillacs. And yet in his own personal life, he didn't appear to have sat down and said, if I stop making money, for how long will the cash keep going? So you have to be thoughtful about these things. You just do. And I know it sounds so simple, and yet a lot of people avoid sitting down and just looking at their life and saying, what do I need? What am I going to need in the future? And if I haven't got it, let's plan for it. Simple, but you've got to do that in life. The second interesting thing about it was when he ran out of money, he had to lay off staff and so on. He had a real collapse where he tried to go back to work and was having a real collapse in his confidence, clearly. And let's just, in light of everything I said earlier, just examine what that was about. So, well, the first thing is level 4, his level of high social status, which he'd attached in his mind, no doubt, to the big house and the fancy car and the rest, and his ability to buy a mink coat for his wife. It collapsed. It went. So instead of enjoying his retirement, suddenly he's feeling really bad and probably didn't know why, but that would be why. And as Maslow says, if a level collapses, you're going to start to focus and you won't feel good. If you're hungry, if you don't have food, you feel hungry. It's not a nice sensation. It's unpleasant. When you have deficiency needs that are unmet, you get some kind of unpleasant feeling. So then the next thing is his level 3 goes, because some of his comforts are going. So level 3 collapses, and then he starts to feel insecure because tricky getting a job and he's running out of money. So his level 2 collapses. So he goes from someone who has really sorted out his fundamental Maslow levels to collapsing all the way down where the only thing he's really got rock solid is level 1. And that's why things went so bad. The other thing to observe is we're told he retires, takes his time, and has no idea what to do. And he starts to get really bored. Why? Well, because he was never focused or thinking about his higher Maslow level, which is self-actualization. A lot of people think that the purpose of life or spare time is to be entertained. Lots of people say, well, I'm going to go play golf and just get entertained. And plenty of people tried that in retirement, and some of them enjoy it. Fair enough, that's all right. Life is there to do what you want. But a lot of people get really bored and they say, gee, what's wrong? I thought this would be fun. Well, the answer is it's not self-actualizing to do that. For some people it is, and that's great. But for a lot of people, it's not really self-actualizing. And if you're not self-actualizing, you're not doing it right. So he had no plan for self-actualization at either level, himself or others. And so that means that his life pretty much imploded. So what Napoleon Hill did was say, go out, buy yourself a Cadillac, and your wife a mink coat, and send it back. So how did that work? Well, temporarily, and it would only be a temporary way of doing it, but temporarily, that changed his state. It changed his state. It changed the way his wife emotionally was operating. It flipped her from probably feeling very stressed and wondering why everything wasn't working well and so on, into being really happy about something. Bit of a surprise for her, clearly. But what this meant was temporarily it reestablished his state, so he felt solid and secure. And then he could go out and be massively successful again. Much better if he hadn't let his state collapse in the first place, I think. So you don't need opulence and ego don't have to go together. The point really of this story is, again, back to Maslow, pay attention to your pyramid. And if you're changing things in life, be aware of that. And then finally, the last story that he talks about is that Napoleon Hill himself had virtually no money, but he went and he rented a really expensive suite, and he invited someone to come and take a look at his book. And the man walked in and said, well, an author who can live in a suite of rooms like this must be the real McCoy. That's just fascinating, really. And what it means is, at the end of the day, I think we're all aware of this. It is an effect of association. And so it means that if you wish to impress people, depending on the people, there's no single way of doing it, but there's no doubt that in certain situations, people will make associations. What happened here is simply that the publisher just assumed that if someone's writing about success, they probably know what they're talking about if they happen to be have the appearance of enormous wealth, and to the contrary, having no wealth, it will probably have been a little harder for him to sell the book. So again, I think it's not so much about, I don't think it was about Napoleon Hill's ego being boosted, though no doubt he felt more comfortable in that environment. It was really about projecting an image, and the fact that if you project an image and you have the substance to follow through on it, which Napoleon Hill absolutely did, I hasten to add, then that is absolutely a way of connecting to other people, of course. So there's a lot in this chapter. What Napoleon Hill says is find your ego booster. I'm going to say, if you look at the whole of the book, one way, so why not summarize it? I've got a couple of minutes left. So one way of thinking about this in your life is through frames. Last thing I mentioned in my introduction. A frame says, what is my intent? What is my perspective? And what is my emotional color? So a lot of these stories, you can say that someone's intent, for example, the salesman who stopped selling, their intent was to sell, but their perspective had changed. So one of them, he had the perspective shift from I'm a perfectly good salesman and I'm really great and I'm going to sell, to I can't sell, I'm too old. It was his frame that weakened. And you can say that when Ray found it difficult, was losing money and was becoming stressed and laying off his staff, his frame weakened. His frame weakened from someone who's saying, I'm successful and competent at my job and I can sell Cadillacs all day long and life is good, to someone who had fear. Fear weakens your frame enormously. It's hard to have a strong frame when you have fear. And therefore his perspective was becoming less and less positive, more and more negative. And you can guess his emotional color was becoming very negative. So how do you turn that around? And what you do is you just observe your frame. You become aware of your frame and you say, one of my roles in life is to have very healthy frames. So not only do you want to be aware of your ego, but think of your frame, and your frame should be this. Your default frame should be that everything is going to be fine. Everything's going to work out. That's positive thinking, that I can do the things I want to do, and that and so on and so forth. So a lot of what is in this chapter, I would say, is not so much about the issue of ego per se. It is about the issue that it is easy to switch from a strong frame to a weak frame, and you can switch from a weak frame to a strong frame. And your goal in life is have a strong frame. Have a strong frame full of good content, so you're doing good things. So with that, I'll pass back to folk. We might have a minute for some questions, I believe.
Like 3-4 pages of notes, Professor Bond. This was so good. You deepened so many layers, and the fact that you were able to just extract so much more out of the stories, that was so powerful. I love the finger. I've seen it before. You know, sometimes we have information, but then it kind of goes away until somebody brings it back into focus. So I love the fact that you brought that that exercise of the finger to relate it every time that we see success. And I love the frames. It was powerful, powerful, powerful. I don't want to take all the time me speaking, so I don't know if we have some questions that are there. And Greg, you can go ahead and put them up, and then I can go ahead and read them to Professor Bond. If not, I'm just going to continue. The pyramid that broke it down, how important it is for us to question and ask ourselves and review the pyramid for ourselves. The bottom half, the basics, right? I'm looking at my notes here. The basics. How secure are we? Okay, so Judy has a question. What exactly is the ego? Can you give an idea where it sits in us?
Yeah. So it's a word that was coined really and brought to prominence, I'd say, by Sigmund Freud in a paper, and particularly in a paper that he wrote about the ego and the id, and which he introduced the superego. And the issue with that word, and it's why I personally prefer to discuss things in terms of, for example, frames or Maslow's hierarchy of needs and so on, is that it's firstly, I don't believe it's a very well-defined term, and it's a little slippery. And secondly, I think that it's been used so much by people in different contexts the last 100 years that it has too much contextualization around it. So it's a bit tricky. But when Freud first started thinking about it, he was aware that we have a subconscious mind, which was a pretty novel idea at that time in many places. And he was trying to understand which part of us is the conscious thinking part that controls what we do consciously. And he first started thinking about ego in those terms. And then he realized that the ego was doing repression. And a lot of his early work was on the idea that there's repression. And then he realized that you can't have those things unless part of the ego is also subconscious. So where does it really sit? And I'm going to tell you what Freud said. Essentially, but if you want the reference, that's the paper to read. So essentially, he said we have the bulk of our mind, if you like, is our unconscious, and our consciousness can only access a tiny part of it. But our consciousness is directing what we are going to do. It can sit, it can plan, it can imagine, and we can hold some of that, but a lot of it is subconscious. The extent to which we do that is part of our ego, and it's connected to the fact that we are aware of ourselves. So is this really what we mean by the ego and how we function? Well, I would argue that, first of all, conscious or self-awareness is a very different thing. And secondly, the notion that an individual animal pays attention to itself in everything from grooming through hunting and feeding is obvious. So I think that there's a sense of awareness of the self in animals. As individual animals have to pay attention to themselves, and that part of that is really the ego. And as I say, humans also have to survive by operating really well with other humans, and a lot of issues in society, a lot of issues individually arise around the conflict of these things and where they are. So to answer your question a little bit, where might the ego actually reside? I would say that probably a lot of the ego, but maybe not all of it, but a lot of parts of the ego, the thinking part that directs us consciously, isn't physically in our prefrontal human cortex, so up here. But some of the drives, which are obvious in Maslow's pyramid, so the things that deficiency needs, we are essentially pre-programmed and driven to need, probably aren't there actually. They're probably in the midbrain. And so I think there's no simple answer to this, either neurologically or even psychologically. So I'm sorry not to be able to give you more precision, but I think that's really because we haven't yet fully understood everything about the mind, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Wow. And then play with the auto suggestions, right? And what would be, and I guess my question to you would be, what would be that recommendation when we have an affirmation and we want to change a belief? you spoke about auto suggestion, but what would be the repetition, the amount of time from your perspective? Because we've heard different things. We've heard the 21 days, we've heard the 30 days, and so forth. To change something, what's your belief in that?
So there are different ways of doing it, and you might as well, if you're going to do affirmations, you can do them on Turbo Boost. So let's just go through what people have said historically about affirmations and how to boost them, and then we can talk about how long it might take. So Coué himself said the way to do affirmations is like a mantra or a chant. So what this means is you want to do it without paying much conscious attention to it. So that's method number one. You can get almost a rosary and just count off affirmations. You just keep doing it subconsciously, because he was trying to lock out really the conscious mind and enable your subconscious just keep hearing the message. The other way you can do it, another way of doing it, is you do it by deliberately attaching a lot of emotion to it. So you emotionalize it, and that means that the emotional part of the brain starts to pay a lot of attention. Two ways of doing it. So the way you can turbocharge is mirror work. So you look in a mirror and you give your affirmation looking in your eyes. And a lot of people find it really hard to do the first few times they do it, because they're going up against a belief and they haven't got the belief yet. And looking yourself in the eye and saying with strong emotion a new affirmation about yourself is therefore quite interestingly challenging. But this really puts it on Turbo Boost. The other way of turbo boosting suggestions is record them. You can get pre-recorded ones and they're fine, but if you record it yourself, probably even more effective, because your brain's used to hearing your own voice, even though in our own heads it sounds a bit different. But you can record your affirmations, just listen to them a lot. How long? Personally, I think it can take a long time if your beliefs have started off from an early point in life, and that's okay. It doesn't matter. Just keep bashing away at doing affirmations for as long as it takes. 20 days. So how fast can affirmations work? How fast? Well, here it is. If you accept a suggestion, that's it, done. So one way in which you can super turbocharge things is hypnosis, because under hypnosis, you can accept a suggestion you've heard once. And little children, by the way, are often damaged because they accept an affirmation they hear once. Someone says, often negative. So negative affirmations are toxic things. Someone says one nasty remark to a little kid about how they look or how smart they are or this or that. Kid accepts that affirmation. That's it for life. So it is possible to have a massive shift instantaneously, or it can really take a long time, a lot of repetition. So the key thing, so you might say, gee, aren't you avoiding the question? I'm being really honest. I think sometimes it can be quick, sometimes it's slow. The key thing is this: just decide you're going to do it and then make it a habit. And I get pretty much all my clients to do affirmations. And what I will do with them is I'm precious in this world for who I am and for what I bring to this world.
Wow. I am precious in this world.
I am precious for in this world for who I am and for what I bring to this world, for the value I bring to this world, you can say. So that affirmation is stating to your mind that you have intrinsic value. And that's important because your self-esteem comes from an innate sense that you have a value in this world. But your self-confidence comes largely as performative self-confidence is what can I do that people value. So one is about who you are intrinsically, and the other is what can you do. You can have all the self-confidence in the world and no self-esteem very easily. If the only thing people respect you for is your performance because you're very good at a thing, you can be the best in the world and have absolutely no self-esteem, because humans don't just want to be esteemed because they're good at doing a thing. Your self-esteem needs to be about who you intrinsically are. So that affirmation addresses it directly, and I think it's therefore a good thing to do, and it emphasizes the value I bring to the world, which I think is always a good thing. So if anyone wants a single affirmation Yeah,
We all
absolutely.
grabbed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all grabbed it. It's already on the chat. It's
Right.
recorded. Everybody's going to come back to it and make sure that they get it. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I would recommend anyone listening to this to learn the elements of self-hypnosis. And so how do you do that? You learn to relax. You can do it really quickly. You learn to relax. You just process your attention on anything at all. People used to use candles and things, but just you can stare at a dot on the wall. Anything that just starts to keep your attention, so you can move into a slight daydreaming state, and then you give yourself a suggestion. You just say something positive, and that is a way of rapidly changing your self-image and your self-belief. So you can try that. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. Thank you for sharing. That was amazing. That was amazing. Okay, so let me just verify. Do we have any additional questions here? Yes, Laura, do you think that playing binaural beats or some other sounds of music to bring the brain into the alpha or theta state while listening to affirmations might help get these affirmations into the subconscious more quickly or more deeply? I have no idea where else to post my question. Okay. You did good.
That's great. Yeah, I think the answer is almost certainly yes. Because what you want to do in order to make it easier for suggestions to go into your mind, typically is you physically relax and you allow your brain to start relaxing as well. And now the natural state of a relaxed mind is alpha, because in fact, if you look at the EEG signal of alpha, what it's really doing is showing pyramidal cells starting to fire and then rest, fire and rest. And you're seeing the envelope of that. That's alpha. It's what it is. So you have between bursts of activity, your brain is starting to rest, is what a lot of alpha is. And if you relax even more than that, you go into a state which is essentially close to, but not equal to sleeping. So you're beginning to shut down your prefrontal cortex and your consciousness to some extent. And that almost however you do that starts to enable suggestions to go in more easily. So binaural beats in a theta wave or an alpha wave state are likely to be very helpful. But you can certainly do that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. I'm not sure how much we have in time. Do we have any additional questions? Let's see. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the information that I've gained today from your lecture. I definitely am going to implement the pyramid and the questions that we should be asking ourselves so that we could ask those questions. Is it enough? What is enough for us? What is enough? And is there enough? All of the questions, the 4 different layers that you provided us, thank you so much. It's all been very enlightening. And I just have to say that I love the depth that you gave perspective to even the stories of Napoleon Hill, the social status, you said something here, if they have lack, they have fear. Now, fear is not always just right there in your face. Fear shows up in so many different ways, and it's about opening and becoming more aware to recognize what that is. So that was incredibly powerful. Thank you so much. Cleona says, we are grateful for you, Philip. This was incredible. We are blessed to have you here with us. Thank you. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you again. And from all of us here at the Napoleon Hill Institute, all of our listeners, they've been spoiled this past week with an amazing event and amazing guest speakers like yourself. So thank you so much for being here with all of us. And till the next time, I look forward to seeing everybody. Thank you, Professor.
Goodbye.
Imagine standing on the precipice of a towering mountain, where the world stretches out before you. A vast canvas, awaiting your touch. Now, picture a single whisper, a mere suggestion, as a gust of wind that could either propel you to the summit of your dreams or cast you into the abyss of doubt and uncertainty. This, my friends, is the astonishing power of suggestion. A single idea, a fleeting thought, can ripple through the mind like a stone cast into a still pond, creating waves that shape one's beliefs, decisions, and ultimately, their destiny. From the pages of history to the intimate moments of our lives, suggestions are the silent architects of our reality. They can come from the media we consume, the conversations we engage in, or the people we hold closest. These suggestions can be subtle or overt, well-intentioned or manipulative, yet their impact is profound. They can nudge us toward growth or confine us to limitations, crafting the very concept of who we are. But here's the intriguing part. While suggestions may seem like external forces beyond our control, we are both suggestible and the suggester. We possess the ability to choose our thoughts consciously. It's the art of directing our mental narrative, the science of shaping our beliefs, and the gateway to redefining our reality. A wise man once said, "Suggestion is one of the most powerful forces in the universe."